So I should first say that I've always been sensitive to these kinds of things, so it's something that is hard to explain without sounding absolutely crazy. I pick up on things sometimes. It's only ever a feeling or physical response to a place or person. There's a long history of abuse over many generations in my family's home, and it caused a lot of really horrible experiences, both paranormal and non-paranormal. It was a very old-fashioned family that held horrid ideals of how women are treated. I think part of my past and maybe the environment has allowed me to pick up on subtle changes in the air. What I mean is that I pick up on the emotional state around me very easy. I could tell when my father came home because of how heavy and oppressive the house felt. I could tell when I needed to hide or stay outside most of the time, because it would feel like the air was full of hot electric pins that would put you on edge. You could tell when he was mad before you saw or heard him. It was like you were waiting for something to fall and shatter at any second, and nothing good will come of it. There was a lot of death, not just in the home, but the entire town, so there was no getting away from it until I was much older. I grew up in an old mining town that didn't become a ghost town after the gold rush. I'm not going to give away too much, but the big mine is still in operation today, but most all the others are closed now. The part of the town I lived in was one of the original buildings from when it was first built, a lot of which is in native territories. There are some homes in my old neighborhood that were confirmed to be built on old burial grounds, and some that were built before there was a town. There was also a lot of death from TB along with all the other stuff. My family is also part of some of the first miners that worked there during its opening and who still live in this town. We've had 5 generations in this home until just recently when it was put on the market by my parents, and hopefully is never bought. I hope the place burns to the ground before anyone else lives there, and I'm horrified at the thought of someone else staying there. If I had money, I would buy it and keep it empty forever. It's hard to start somewhere with so much going on, so I'll start with the very first memory I have of anything paranormal when I was 4 years old. I woke up to the woman in my room singing to me like she did every night. She would sing to me in this beautiful language that I had never heard before. Except this was in the morning, and it seemed sad and like something was wrong. For some reason I had this feeling like I had to follow her, and I did. Side note, all the rooms connect to the open living room and kitchen, as it was heated by the stove and cooled by the root cellar that was connected to the kitchen pantry. It was like a giant rectangle separated with the central point being the kitchen, directly in the center left of the building, and the front door being bottom left. So when we reached the kitchen living room, she waved and smiled like she was about to leave. The thing is, I thought she was real as any normal person. The thing is, I don't remember her actually saying anything to me in English or Spanish, and I was in a multi-language home where we spoke it often. I just remember that she loved me so much and was always there for me when bad things happened. She was always there to sing to me, and was there when I was scared. I was so upset that I started crying and asking her not to leave. I remember to this day the look on her face after 30 years. She smiled her sad smile, then turned to the door, and instead of walking out the door, she walked out the wall where the door used to be before the additional rooms were added on, which I didn't know about until I was in my 20s. I never saw her again, and I never heard her singing again after that. I still get really sad sometimes thinking about that morning. I don't know where she went, but I hope I get to see her again someday. My mother found me after this while I was still crying. I knew it would be bad to tell her the truth, so I never told her about what happened and probably never will. After that day is when all the really bad things started to happen, little by little. It was like a small hole had appeared in our home, and slowly things were leaking through. My uncle became so very sick shortly after this and died in one of the rooms I slept in. We switched rooms every few years. I was still young, but I remember him very clearly when he died. It was a very traumatic death and was not peaceful. I don't remember everything from that time, but I remember him coughing up blood and trying to pretend like everything was fine. I just remember that I woke up one morning and Grandma had told us that he had passed in the night and was already with the morticians. After this point, he was seen a lot by my family and visitors. Grandma was heard on more than one occasion crying and telling him to move on and that he was supposed to be in heaven. I remember telling him, "Mijo, you'll make the angels cry if you don't move on a regular basis." Maybe a few months after he passed, I moved into his room. We were very, very poor, and I had no choice but to take the bed he passed in or sleep on the floor, and that's very bad because of the cold. So the first night I was in there after moving back, I remember not being able to sleep because of the shadow in the room that wouldn't allow me to sleep. It wasn't supposed to be there and was something new, and I was really scared. It was my uncle. I at some point finally fell asleep and was awoken by me being dropped onto my bed from at least a foot or more. It was enough of a height that I bounced more than once. I opened my eyes and saw this black stuff around me. It wasn't like smoke exactly, but moved like it. But it was just black, like the absence of light. I remember jumping from the bed, too scared to do anything, but watched it disappear into the center of the mattress. I went and slept with my brother in his cot and then on the floor in his room when he became too big. I never slept in that room again after that. From then on, I could always feel this evil darkness watching me every time I would walk past the room. I could never look into the doorway anymore. It's like when someone is so oppressive, you can't help but look at the floor and don't dare look them in the eyes. It sometimes felt like it would dare you to look. Sometimes it threw things and it would rush you and scream things. There were many nights where dishes were thrown from the kitchen and into a room, sometimes mine and sometimes the other kids' rooms. Only Grandma's room and the bathroom had doors, so it soon became a rule that nothing could be left on the countertops, and all cupboards were locked with front door latches, the ones that would hook and latch close and could not be opened without a bit of effort. The fridge was also locked for the same reason. We would wake up to milk or other things being thrown into the living rooms and in bedrooms. It got so bad that Grandma had the priest come over every weekend, up until she was too old and sick and was taken to a nursing facility. When he stopped coming and Grandma passed, it was like a burst and everything just went crazy. I'm not religious at all, but I feel that priest was stopping something bad that now had full control again. There was far more than things being broken, vases and cups mostly. When he stopped coming, it seemed like there was more traffic, and it was surrounding the cellar and kitchen pantry. It's getting long and there's still so much I've not even touched on. I will post more later and try to tell one or two more stories at a time. I'll answer as many questions as I can, and thanks for listening. It's hard talking about because none of it seems real. There was a lot that happened, and some of it I don't think I'll ever be able to talk about because there are just some things you can't put into words. Everything sounds fake even to me, but had there not been so many witnesses in my family, I would not believe it was real, and I would in fact think that I was the crazy one. I've had several experiences all around the same location, within months of each other. The first one happened when I had just adopted my puppy. He was 11 weeks old and loved everyone. He would run up to anyone and everyone, tail wagging, the friendliest thing. One day, we were out on a walk in a large, open cow field behind where I lived at the time. It was dusk and there wasn't really anyone else around, except this hiker in the distance walking toward us. My dog saw him and stopped in his tracks, got down low to the ground and just started growling. The hiker was still too far off away from me to even make out his face, but my puppy was freaking out. As he got closer, I started to become seriously unnerved. He was pacing towards us like a robot. That's the only way I can describe it, or like the way military people walk. He was pale, white, and had these dead eyes that seemed to not see us at all. There was no acknowledgement of us whatsoever. He just robo-sped walked straight in our direction. The dog was going crazy, growling, whining. I'd never heard him make those sounds before. When the hiker walked past me, I just felt this sense of dread hit me in the gut. It felt like pure evil. It was the single most terrifying encounter I've ever had. As he passed us, his eyes didn't move. It was as if he didn't even see us, even though the dog was growling directly at him. He was just power walking past us and continued on. It was strange, too, the direction he was going in, because all there was that way was a giant hill, and it was getting dark. As soon as he passed us, me and the dog just broke into a run, as if we were both running for our lives. We ran all the way home. Now, the next experience happened in the same field. Again, I was walking the dog a couple of months after the first encounter. Again, just reiterating the point that he is the friendliest dog ever. Especially as a pup, all he wanted was to run up to every stranger for pets. We were in this field and there's a load of hikers with backpacks on, checking their maps. Puppy is checking them out, tail wagging, when he zeroes in on this one hiker lady who's standing still, just observing a tree. He dropped to the ground, started growling and whining, just like the last time. He didn't acknowledge us. She just stared at this tree with her dead eyes, and she was pale again, super pale. And when I caught a glimpse of her face properly, I felt that same sense of dread as the last time. She looked fairly normal, except she had almost no nose. I know this sounds insane. She had almost slits, like someone who's done too much cocaine and had their nose fall off, or like Voldemort. I don't think the dog could have been growling at her appearance, though, because her back was turned to us when the growling started. The third one freaked me out the most. A friend and I were just leaving my house to walk the dog when we realized we'd forgotten something inside. Where I live, there's no car access and it's considered the safest area ever, so the dog is usually free to roam around outside, saying hello to people on the path. We left him outside for a second while we went back in, and when I came out, there was a man in a business suit standing completely still, staring at my dog, and my dog was staring back at him. Not growling this time, just very still. It was so weird. He wasn't looking at the dog like he was afraid of it, more like he'd never seen one before. It was a curious look. He was genuinely intrigued by him. Also, the fact that he was wearing a suit was strange, because I lived on a boat on the river. It's muddy and there's cows and dogs and stuff. It was just such a strange outfit to see someone in that location. Almost as if someone was trying to play human and got it wrong. Anyway, so this stare-off went on for a good minute or so while my friend and I just kind of observed from the doorway. Then he walked on, past a gate and into the field where the other two encounters occurred. We followed behind him because we happened to be going in the same direction. We followed him through the gate, into the field, and watched him veer off to follow a path to our left, towards the hill that the first hiker was marching towards. We continued on straight with the dog, heading for the pub on the other side of the field. Can you tell I'm from England? When I realized I'd forgotten my purse, I turned around to go back, but now the suit guy was back at the gate we'd all just come from. He was just standing there, staring at the gate, occasionally lifting the latch on it, as if he was inspecting it. It was super weird and creepy. What was he doing? He was just walking away and then turned around and came back to what? I guess check the gate mechanism was working properly? I decided not to go back for my purse because I didn't want to have to walk past him again. Now the fourth experience happened in the same field another couple of months after that. On a dog walk, again. My boyfriend was with me, but he told me to go ahead into the field while he finished getting ready and that he'd meet me there. So Pup and I walked out into the field and immediately spotted a hiker, robo-power walking towards us as if he'd just come down from the hill. It wasn't the same guy as before, but it was the same kind of unsettling energy. I felt it in my gut. It was wrongness or unease, and he was walking the exact same way. I pretended to chase my dog in the opposite direction and waited for him to pass through the gate before I got back onto the path. I watched him walk through it and disappear past the gate and down the path. Puppy and I carried on walking when, about 2 minutes later, I felt like I needed to turn around, so I did. And there he was again, power walking towards us with those dead eyes. I literally felt my blood run cold. I've never been so terrified. He was going so fast and with such intensity that the dog and I just started running. I fumbled for my phone and tried to call my boyfriend, who didn't answer, and veered off the path, cut through the long grass, and circled back to the gate in a giant arc. Creepy alien dude continues power walking up the path he'd just come down, as if he's going back up the hill. Sweating and out of breath, I spotted my boyfriend finally walking to join us, and ran to him babbling about the weirdo hiker with a bad energy. He says, "Where?" and as I turn to point him out, we both realize that he's now power walking backwards, with his eyes locked on us, still heading back up the hill backwards. What in the world? We were both seriously freaked out. These all happened in the summer. Come autumn, I was living alone on the boat with the dog while boyfriend was away for work. One night around midnight, the dog and I were walking home from a pub quiz. It's always super dark on these country paths, and my phone had died, so I had no light and was literally crashing into hedges and trees, trying to feel my way home by moonlight. And the moon and stars were super bright that night. So I get to my boat. I have to cross over the river on a bridge. As I'm walking over the bridge, I was looking up at the stars, as they were the only source of light. I ended up observing what I thought was a plane because it was moving steadily in my direction, over that hill and in that field where everything happened. As I'm watching it, it seemed to suddenly look at me. I don't know how to describe that. It's as if it suddenly realized it was being observed. I felt us connect, and it shot off to the left super fast and blinked out of existence. Obviously, in my mind, that's a UFO, and it's hovering over the hill where the creepy alien-type people keep appearing from. So now I was terrified. I ran all the way home, crashing into bushes like a crazy person because I couldn't see, locked the door and hid under the covers like a kid. A month or so after that, Pup woke me up at around 4 a.m. because he needed the toilet. Half asleep, I went to open the door for him and let him outside. I want to just paint a picture so you understand how weird this is. I live on a boat on the river. Where my boat was moored was the middle of the countryside. There's no lights on at night. Not much light pollution, no street lights. It's pitch dark apart from the light of the stars and moon. So when I stuck my head out of the boat to call the dog back, I found myself being blinded by a white light. I was confused. I looked up at the sky and couldn't even open my eyes fully because it was so bright. It was like this giant white mass, really low in the sky. So low and bright that I couldn't see anything else if I looked up. The dog came running back in and I slammed the door shut, locked it, and tried to go back to sleep. It was almost like a you didn't see anything moment. I didn't even think anything of it at the time. Looking back, it makes almost zero sense why I would feel that way. I even went back to the spot recently to make sure there's no other light I missed, like a new lamppost or something. There isn't. I don't know what these mean, but I moved back onto land and away from that hill and field, and they stopped happening. I actually walked up to the top of that hill one morning to check it out, and it's honestly just a pretty picnic spot. Definitely not an alien HQ. My aunt makes us go to the graveyard like 4 times a year to bring flowers to my grandparents, an aunt and her long-lost boyfriend. Even if it's Mother's Day, she will bring flowers to his grave. She said he was the love of her life. His name was Haram, and he died during a gruesome car crash. He had already bought the wedding ring to ask my aunt to marry him. The thing is, I learned not too long ago something I didn't know about Haram. He had been getting violent during the last months of their relationship, basically going full toxic on my aunt, prohibiting her to have any male friends, monitoring her outings, and being choosy about her girlfriends. In fact, once he raised his hand at her and even threatened to hit her. My aunt was devastated, and though she still loved him, she definitely didn't want to marry him knowing he was going to be like that from time to time. So she asked, "Please, please God, make him go away from me." Not too long after, Haram died during that car crash. I know my aunt blames herself for his death, feeling guilty enough to leave flowers at his grave every time we visit the graveyard. Up until that point, it seems like a twisted coincidence, right? Well, after Haram died, my aunt had other boyfriends, but she remained mainly single and immersed herself on us, her family. About 3 years ago, she met a past boyfriend of hers by pure coincidence. They hit it off again, and they got together again despite him living in another state. They took planes and buses to each other, and they made it work. However, that guy proved himself to also be terrible. He was controlling, told my aunt to not spend her money with us, so much that she cut out vacations with us, which we traditionally had yearly, and she started giving terrible and cheap presents for Christmas and birthdays. And okay, it's her money and she can use it however she wants, even in her boyfriend. So she bought him things and all, and he got more and more confident in himself, thinking he had her wrapped around his finger. He got angry when she didn't pick up her phone. She had to let him know when she was going out of the house, who with, and the time she thought that she would be back. Not too long ago, I was having a conversation with her, and she was recently frustrated with her boyfriend and blurted out exactly this. "Please, God, please make him..." Gasp. "Oh no, I shouldn't finish that. Last time he listened." But I guess her process of thought was already finished, even if it didn't come out of her mouth. Her boyfriend hasn't called her in 4 days as I'm typing this, a full 180 from his constant calling and nagging. Nobody has heard a word from him. Harder to get a hold of him given he's in another state. She's getting worried because she's sure he has just broke up with her without even having a word. And I couldn't help but think, wouldn't it be creepy if he had, died? His phone is dead. He hasn't contacted my aunt through a public phone or any other medium. Her birthday was like 2 days ago, and he was as quiet as a rock. Now, to update you guys, I know everyone wanted some type of closure with this, and so did I, but unfortunately, I have no idea what happened to him. I skipped a lot of family drama because it wasn't really relevant, but here it goes. He was one of many brothers, and his younger brother is dating an Aunt C of mine that's like 15 years younger than my aunt that this post is about. So my mom asked my Aunt C if she had heard anything about this idiot, and she said no, but she was going to ask the brother. She called back later to say that the brother told her that this guy hasn't shown up in several days and that they were even considering on hiring a new guy to play the bass to replace him. And that's the last I heard of it. His own brother didn't know where he was and he didn't really care. Before you mention it, no, the brother's not terrible to my Aunt C at first. In fact, he seemed to go after her money, but he fell in love and they visit each other frequently. I also mentioned my aunt has a terrible personality. My mom and her fought, and she blocked my mom and me by proxy from WhatsApp, so we also haven't heard from her. But she surely has been keeping in contact with someone else, since nobody has called us to say she died or whatever. She has beef with most of my aunts, and not everyone calls her very often, only a couple of people. I promise to update again, only if I discover he is in fact dead. I'm currently a 29-year-old guy living on the West Coast, and only recently have I taken an interest in anything paranormal again. I used to be very into the topic of ghosts when I was a kid. However, there was something that happened when I was 17 that scared me so badly, I steadfastly avoided anything paranormal. Until now. It's been 12 years since that day, and only now, after over a decade of no ghost sightings at all, do I feel like I can finally talk about it. When I was 17, I worked for a small business in a very small town of only a few thousand people in the Midwestern U.S. The business was on the town square, on the second floor of a 2-story brick building that was constructed close to 100 years ago. The bottom floor was a furniture store, and the only way to gain access to the second floor was past a dead bolted glass door with a thick steel frame and up a long straight flight of stairs. I taught self-defense classes part-time, which isn't a bad gig when you're a teenager. The head instructor lived over an hour away, so it was up to me to teach one night a week, and occasionally open the place up for the night before anyone arrived for class. Additionally, I was also required to clean the building at least once a week on our off days, which wasn't difficult as I usually only had to run the vacuum and clean the windows and mirrors. Opening the front door required turning the key in a very, very old deadbolt lock, which would occasionally stick and would only open with a very loud clicking sound. One day, I stopped by work on an off day on the weekend with my girlfriend so we could clean the place. Just so no one saw my car parked outside and assumed there was a self-defense class being held that night, I locked the door from the inside by turning the deadbolt and loudly clicking it into place before walking up the long flight of steps. Working together, we vacuumed the floors and made quick work of the place. Because we were two hormonally crazed teenagers that rarely had any quiet, alone time, of course we took a moment to get busy on the floor of the front office while we were there. Unprofessional, I know, but it's not like there was anyone there. The town square was deserted outside since it was the weekend and all the businesses were closed. Besides, I had made sure the front door was locked, and the only person with a key to that particular lock was my boss, who wasn't even in the same town. Afterwards, I walked to the bathroom, which was located in the back of the building. On my way back to the front of the building, while I was walking directly in front of the stairs, I heard something. I heard a man's slow, heavy footsteps coming up the long flight of stairs at the front of the building. My first instinct was to turn and run since I was stark raving naked at the time and clearly wasn't expecting visitors. However, the second thought I had was that this was impossible. I had locked the front door myself. It was an old deadbolt lock that barely worked, and besides, I would have heard a loud, resounding click if someone had unlocked the door. Against my better judgment, my burning curiosity had me taking a step forward. I had to see what was making the sound. I just had to. If nothing else, simply looking down the empty flight of stairs and seeing nothing else would help me understand that I merely imagined the noise, and that of course there was nothing there to make it. However, as I thought all of this, the footsteps continued, and continued to get louder as I walked closer to the noise. Then, I saw it. It was a humanoid shadow. A solid, substantial shadow was climbing the stairs. This wasn't a shadow in the sense that something was blocking a light source and casting a flat shadow on a flat surface. It was more of a person. Imagine a shapeless, formless human cloaked in blackness. It had no hair, no facial features, no distinguishing characteristics of any kind, but was tall and broad-shouldered. Also, it was walking directly towards me. Its head appeared first, followed by its shoulders and its torso. Then, it was as if it looked up, and was surprised to see me. I looked at it exactly where its eyes should have been, and it looked back for less than a fraction of a second before it jerked backwards, as if startled, and it simply vanished, as if it had never existed to begin with. I blinked several times and walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down the stairs, expecting to see someone, somehow playing a trick on me, but there was no one there. Nothing. Just as I had initially expected to see before seeing the shadow, it was just an empty staircase, just as I thought it would be. After all, I had locked the front doors myself, right? Immediately afterwards, I walked back to my girlfriend and we quickly got dressed and left. I didn't mention what I just saw to her, both because I didn't want to scare her and because I didn't think she would believe me. I wrote off the entire incident as something I imagined, a bizarre hallucination. It couldn't possibly have happened. There was no one around outside the building since all the nearby businesses were closed and no one else had the key. At first I thought that perhaps the shadow was simply of someone passing by on the sidewalk downstairs. But the light from the front door only reached to the bottom step of the stairs, and it wouldn't explain how the shadow was somehow getting closer to me as well as somehow climbing the stairs. I never saw the shadow again after that, but it didn't end there. Afterwards, I felt as though someone was watching me every single time I walked into that building. I would have to unlock the place before each class, and I would have to walk up the long stairway in the pitch darkness, the very same staircase I saw the shadow on. I occasionally heard footsteps after that and felt as if though I was being followed. It was almost as if though someone was there, someone unseen who really didn't like me. It was as if I was somewhere I wasn't welcome and someone wanted me to leave. Eventually, the feeling got so bad I didn't want to be alone there anymore. I brought my girlfriend with me a second time, and she later complained that she felt like someone was watching her. However, during the day, it just felt like a normal building. The oppressive, creepy feelings started around sunset and only got worse at night. Much worse. Around the time I graduated from high school, my boss decided the business was no longer profitable and chose to close the building down. While it royally sucked to lose my only paying job, I was very glad to never have to set foot in that place ever again. About a year later, I was in a new relationship, and I told my new girlfriend the story of all that I saw on my old job. She was curious, so one night I drove by and parked the car directly in front of the door. It had been quite some time since I was last there, so surely it was safe by now. I immediately felt like I was being watched. Whatever it was, it had never left. It was like someone was standing at the top of the stairs and was glaring downwards with such unbelievable hatred and malice. It was unbearable. My girlfriend immediately noticed it as well. She freaked out and demanded that I slam my foot on the gas pedal to get us out of there immediately, and of course I did. Even to this day, over a decade later, I still don't feel comfortable driving past that building after dark when I fly home to visit my parents. I don't know what I saw there, but it's clearly rooted to that building, and either cannot or will not leave. Do any of you have any ideas about what it could have been? Maybe understanding it a little more will help me feel like I didn't lose my mind when I was a teenager. This happened to my brother and I years ago when we were kids. Our mom was the assistant director for the children's choir at our church and would sometimes pick up kids and take them home when they didn't have rides to practice. These siblings we used to take home lived in a neighborhood not far from ours, so we took them home nearly after every practice. So this one night, it was the same as usual. We all piled up into my mom's SUV and took them home after practice. It was dark out by that time, so when we parked out in front of their house, my mom would always get out to walk them to the door. My brother and I, as always, stayed in the car. I was in the passenger seat and he was in the back. Then my brother said the strangest sentence. There's a man with a dog's head looking out the window." "What?" I said, and then turned to look at him. I thought he was joking. He was looking at the house across the street, so I followed his line of sight. There was indeed a man with a dog's head looking out of the second-story window. I don't even remember saying anything. We just stared. It was a completely still and tall figure, wearing dark clothes with the head of a white dog. I remember constantly leaning and squinting in its direction because I wanted to get a clearer look at it. Something about the image was foggy. I knew what I was looking at and I knew what I saw, but at the same time it was as if the being was non-corporeal, I suppose. I don't know, I just felt like if I looked away or even just glanced in a different direction, it would be gone. So I just kept my eyes on it. I wasn't scared though, just curious and amazed by what I was looking at. It felt like we were staring forever. Then my mom came back in the car and broke the spell. Immediately, we were rushing to tell her to look at the window. She seemed confused and slightly amused by what she was thinking were antics, but she looked anyways. "Where?" she asked. We kept pointing at the window, but she couldn't see it. "Don't y'all know whose house that is?" she said. "It's an old couple from the church. They live there." Then she drove off past the house. We watched the window the whole time as we drove past. The dog-headed person was still there, seemingly watching us, but still not moving. We tried to tell our dad and our grandma and still bothered our mom about it for a while. They listened, but didn't seem too concerned. I knew they thought we were making it up or mistaking something else for what we saw, so we just stopped mentioning it. We hardly even talked about it with each other. Still, each time we went to drop the kids off, I looked at that window to see if it was still there. It never was. I'm 22 now, and the memory is quite fuzzy. I don't remember the year, the month, or even how old I was. Trying to remember details is like trying to remember a dream. We started the children's choir when I was 8, so I know I was at least 8 to 10 years old. I saw a YouTube video on urban legends recently that mentioned sightings of a dog-headed people, and it sparked my need to know about what it was I really saw. So I'm posting this to reach out. If anyone reading this has seen anything similar to what my brother and I saw that night, please let me know. This story starts many years ago when I was a little girl living in an apartment with my dad and older brother. I used to hate to go to bed early and often snuck out of bed to just run around the living room in the middle of the night. I always left the lights off and was able to see because there was enough light shining through the glass door from the balcony. On one such night, I slipped out of bed and made sure my brother was still asleep as we shared a bunk bed and walked quietly as possible to the living room. I left the bedroom door open every time in case I needed to run back to bed. As I played around the living room, jumping on the couches and the like, I noticed a black shadow from the balcony. I immediately stopped and looked outside and just saw this silhouette-like black figure just standing by the edge of the door near the handle. I freaked out and immediately ran back to bed and closed the door. This woke my brother up and he got worried and asked what was wrong. I told him what I'd seen, and he'd said he'd go look himself to make sure everything was all right. He opened the door, and I watched him walk out. A minute later, he came back in and said he didn't see anything, so it must be okay now. I accepted the answer and went back to bed. Later, I realized that my brother had still left the door open. I crawled out of bed to close it myself, and before I could touch the door, it slammed shut loudly. This caught my brother's attention, and when I explained what happened, he was confused. I was so terrified that I asked to sleep with him, and he let me. A minute later, though, our dad came into the room and asked what the noise was. I explained to him what I'd seen, and he didn't really believe me as he doesn't believe at all in the paranormal. He figured one of us had slammed the door. My brother tried to say it was a draft to just get him to go back to bed, but my dad didn't think so since he left the windows and balcony locked and air off. So my dad goes about trying to question us to see who slammed the door, and the middle of me trying to explain that I was really only trying to close the door, but never touched, and we heard a loud noise coming from the living room. It sounded like another door slamming shut. My dad automatically leaves towards the living room and turns on the light. My brother and I followed and saw our dad looking around. We only have 2 doors in the living room, the front door and the balcony door. My dad checks the front door first and finds it locked. Then he goes to the balcony door and finds it unlocked and slightly ajar. See, when that door gets slammed, it's loose enough that it actually slides back a bit. My dad closed and locked the door and sent my brother and I back to bed, and that was the end of that. For a few more years, we lived in that apartment, and every now and then I'd see that black figure and hear a door slam, and sometimes the pillows on the couches were on the floor. My dad always thought of a logical answer, and my brother and I just started to ignore it since he was. We moved out once my dad got remarried to my stepmom and lived in a 2-story house. My brother and I figured, new house, new story. We ended up getting a dog and 2 cats. For a little while it was normal until my stepmom asked me one morning if I had folded the dog's blanket. I said no and told her I hadn't even touched it. She accepted my answer and then asked my brother. He said no as well and asked what this was about. She replied that she had found the blanket perfectly folded and on top of the washer machine. This was incredibly odd as the dog slept in her bed on the floor and hated her blanket being taken away. We only ever touched it to wash it, and it had just recently been cleaned. Well, our stepmom was very quick to believe it was the work of a ghost. She explained to me that she had seen ghosts before when she was younger. My dad, however, remained adamant that ghosts just weren't real and said one of us had probably folded it and forgot about it. We moved on with our day, but that was only the beginning. I started to see the same black figure again, and it was always by an open door right next to the handle. I started getting really scared because I had started sleeping with my door open so the cats could get in whenever they wanted. I tried to ignore it and just sleep, but whenever I hear my door creak, I was terrified to look, and always waited until I felt my cats on my bed before I'd look. One night, I was staying up late to do homework and I heard my door creak, so I turned right away, not really thinking and just wanting to see my cat for a break. Instead, I saw that black figure and my heart stopped. I was just frozen. After what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, the door just slammed shut and I screamed. My stepmom and dad came running in to see what was wrong, and I frantically told them what I'd seen. My dad just thought I was tired and seeing things, but my stepmom listened and told me to just wait and she'd be right back. When she came back, it was with her rosary, and she hung it on my door handle, telling me it'd keep what I'd saw away and that if I saw it again, to go straight to her. It was after this incident when I started having things happen at my mother's house. Every day, like clockwork, you'd start hearing this creaking sound coming from the ceiling after 6 p.m. till 3 a.m. My mother and her husband brushed it off as the house settling or the pipes, but my brother and I both agreed that it was just too weird for it to be in this time frame. After that, I started getting woken up by my Rottweiler growling at my wall by my bed. I didn't think anything of it at first because he tended to bark and growl out of windows a lot, but when I realized that he was actually growling at my wall, I got nervous. I'd slowly crawl out of bed and go to hug my dog. He'd pause his growling to sniff me and look me over. Once he was satisfied, he'd go back to growling at the wall. After a few minutes, he'd stop and then sniff me again before sitting down. I'd get back in bed and he'd put his head by my pillow until I fell asleep. When my mother's second dog, a Weimaraner, got old enough, she'd come into my room at night as well and start growling at the wall too. She was the kind of dog who'd make noises and kind of talk to you, but she never growled or barked. I did the same thing and got out of bed until they stopped growling, but it started affecting my sleep. I eventually told my stepmom what was going on after a picture frame above my bed flew onto the floor and crashed. She told me that there was a spirit or ghost that was following me and that I needed to be careful since she believed it was only getting more active. Hearing those words scared me. I managed to push on and try to ignore the doors closing randomly and my dogs growling. Even my cats started getting weird around the house sometimes, but I just kept thinking that if I ignored it, it'd go away. But I was wrong. My dad eventually moved houses again, and this time we were living in a brand new home. So new that my dad had bought it while it was still being built. I explained my worries to my stepmom about the thing following me here, and she told me to just let her know the moment I saw it again. After a few weeks, everything was fine until I started hearing voices. The kind that sounds like someone is having a conversation, but it's muffled like they're a few rooms away. I'd stop whatever I was doing to go check it out, but whenever I did, it'd stop. It got to the point where I'd be completely alone in the house and I'd hear what sounded like my dad talking to someone. I'd call out for him, confused, only to look out a window and see that his car was still gone. After that, I started to hear footsteps like someone was walking around in my parents' room upstairs. The weirdest thing about it, though, was it always sounded exactly like my dad's footsteps. Everyone had a specific way of walking, and his were always more thudded and loud. I brought it up to my stepmom, and she told me she heard it too. She then explained to me it was coming from her closet and that sometimes she'd walk in to find boxes from the top shelf, right in the middle of the floor. Keep in mind, this is one of those big walk-in closets, so anything that falls wouldn't naturally end up in the center of the floor. I still live with my dad and stepmom to this day while going to college, and I hear all of this stuff. I don't see the figure as much anymore, and the doors don't slam as often, but they do still shut. It's just quieter. The thing that made my friends believe I had something following me was because I'd spend the night at their house, and anything I usually experienced started happening whenever I came over. One friend of mine, who was terrified of anything paranormal, actually refused to sleep at my house and doesn't like me spending the night at hers because she had seen the black figure. It's sort of become a bit of a joke now with them. They'll tease me and say that if you invite me over, you better be prepared for 2 guests instead of 1, or to make sure all the doors are shut before sleeping. Some friends are incredibly curious and often like to come over or invite me over just so that they can try and see the figure. I honestly don't know what to do about it and don't know if I should do anything. I mean, it's never been hostile towards anything, but it's still unsettling to see it sometimes and have it break some stuff. Nowadays I sleep with my door closed and locked, but sometimes I'll wake up to see it open. I'm sorry for the long story, but I really don't know what to do, and if anyone has any ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. In my late teens, I had this friend, let's call him Felix. Unlike my social anxiety-ridden self, he was a social butterfly and appeared to know everyone. As such, I ended up knowing a lot of people by proxy and hanging out with some interesting folk. The one I'm going to talk about below is named Carly. I'm not 100% convinced, but she might be an actual witch. I was at Felix's place one night with a few people and we were all playing a game of Risk. We had smoked a bit and got to talking about weird topics, compounded by the fact that we were weird teens. You know, the usual. My buddy had crazy stories about getting stuck in a radio tower. Another friend had stories about getting locked in a basement all night. I had my ghost stories, and it was one of the few times people believed me, so that was nice. Carly had the one we all called nonsense on the most. Carly was your typical edgy goth girl, complete with clothes that would put a stripper to shame, and enough makeup that it had a noticeable thickness. She was hot, I'd admit that, but we were distant friends, and I had hung out with her a few times with Felix. She seemed nice enough, if a bit emotionally reserved. Well, this night she up and states that she's an energy vampire. I had no idea what that was, as I didn't really have access to a lot of internet in rural Newfoundland. She goes on to say that she gets energy from people's emotions, she can feel people's auras, she can detect when people have issues, and she has to keep her emotions in check because she can get powerful. Me and Felix call nonsense, as we had never seen her be powerful, and those kind of claims reek of fakeness coming from the edgy goth kid. She goes on and does a reading where she is able to tell me about my emotions. I remember she rightly said I was depressed, but that isn't much of a shocker to anyone who met teen me and told Felix he had a grave injury impending. His mom did have a stroke like a year later, but for what little that might be worth. She also said some other vague things to the rest of the people we were hanging out with, which were probably correct, I can't confirm. Finally, after this had gone on for about an hour or so, I called her bluff. I asked where did she get this mystical power. I remember asking if her dad was a warlock and her mom a pixie. She says she was taught by Mother Hilda. That was the most nonsense name I'd ever did hear, and I said, well, where does she live? Up your butt? Becoming visibly distressed, she said to me and Felix, who was laughing, she could bring me to her next weekend. Thinking she would bring me to one of her weird goth friends who would try some edgy stuff and always down for a laugh, I of course said yes. Felix was down as well, so it was settled. Now it's important to know that I have an issue with being a passenger in cars. I fall asleep almost immediately when not driving, a holdover from long car trips with the family. I mean, I sleep immediately. If I can make it 5 minutes, it's a miracle. It's really important to remember this because I sure wish it wasn't the case. So when the weekend comes, me, Felix, and Carly all get together to go meet this person. I had assumed it would be some person we would meet in the basement of their parents' house, but Carly says that Mother Hilda lives on the Bona Vista Peninsula. That's a good 3-hour drive in good weather from where I lived, and I was frankly more angry that she didn't bring snacks. So we all got in her car. She'd gotten her license already since she was 6 months older than us, and we set off. In my true fashion, I fell asleep within minutes, and I don't think we even hit the highway before I was out. When I had woken up, we were driving on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. For those of you who haven't been to Newfoundland, I think my wife put the Bona Vista Peninsula best. It's like you're walking on the graves of a million really angry ghosts. Gloomy skies, gloomy landscapes, and a real feeling that something is watching you from the tree line where you can't see them. I frankly hate the place. Most people I know from it are great, but everyone I know who lives on it is miserable. So I come to, and we are driving down this poor excuse for a road. And what could be more aptly named a goat path? So I immediately start complaining. Where are we? Why are we here? What are you planning? Reasonable questions. To all of the questions she answered, Mother Hilda will answer. Like a psychopath. Felix doesn't say a word and just looks mildly amused. So after what felt like forever, we come to some kind of clearing. It is really just a place where the trees aren't that big. In the middle sat an old-school Newfoundland box house in absolute horrible condition. Like no one had shown this house a lick of love in 100 years run down. It still had windows given, but the roof looked like it was attempting to threaten the ground with its lean. I remember the place was blue and the goat path didn't reach all the way up to it. It stopped about 100 feet shy, because of course it did. Carly stops the car, gets out, and like a psychopath says again, Mother Hilda will answer. I look to Felix, who has the biggest grin on his face. He's high as a kite. I berate him, as this is starting to get horrifying, and his only real response getting out of the car is, You're a better man than me for doing this sober. So I get out of the car with Felix, who insists I go first. My only thought is, I'm gonna get murdered. Carly walks through the trees with her arms outstretched in a T-pose, spinning and singing, Mother Hilda knows all. Felix looks at me and says, We are gonna get murdered, aren't we? Carly reaches this door, opens it up, and motions for us to come in. Now, I saw two options. Either go in with the witchy woman or brave the untamed wilderness of rural Newfoundland and God knows where. I decide the latter, as that's the only one that has a chance that I die and no one finds the body. I reach the door and the place is pitch black inside. It was a general overcast day outside and the windows must have been covered in paper or something, not freaking furnished, no lighting, just rotting boards and the smell of my impending doom. I can hear Carly laughing upstairs because of course there's an upstairs, so I think, yep, I die here. This is the weird house for weird rituals. I can tell Felix is thinking the same thing, but insists I go first. Thankfully, the stairs were next to the front door, so I didn't have to risk walking through that creepy place. When I look up the stairs, I nearly peed myself. At the top is a girl, completely naked, and pointing down the upstairs hallway. She has makeup like Carly, thick and dark, and is staring at us with intent, possibly murderous eyes. I turn to look back at Felix when the girl at the top of the stairs belts out in a voice louder than I'd pegged her to have, Mother Hilda doesn't wait. So petrified, I walk up those stairs. The place was eerily silent. I hadn't really noticed it before, but there was no sound of the wind in the trees, no birds chirping, no rustling, and no floorboard creaking. I started to really get those vibes on strong, but Felix flashed me a hunting knife he brought along and whispered, I got you. We're leaving here alive. Feeling 0.1% better, I reached the top of the stairs. The girl, who was maybe 14, ran into a room on the upper floor, and I saw Carly at the end of the hall next to a door what I assumed to be a closet. She had the biggest grin on her face, like a proud child about to show their mom a Play-Doh figure they had worked on all day. I walked closer and with all the manly gusto I had in me, made it 5 steps in the hallway. I had the feeling I was going to puke, and every fiber in my being was telling me whatever was behind that door was danger, pure danger. Carly looked at me and said, "Mother Hilda will see you," and opened that door. What was inside was what I believed to be a small child, its back turned to me and eating something in the closet. I remember seeing chicken bones at its feet, which were huge, by the way. It was wearing a ratty red shawl and was completely naked below the waist, and that's when I noticed it was an old person. It had that typical saggy old person butt, the one that lacks all tone and definition. I watched this thing turn around, and it was the scariest sight of my life. It was some kind of old woman, but I questioned that frequently given its appearance. It had tiny, tiny arms like an infant on a toddler's body that was holding her shawl up. It had wispy angelic strands barely holding onto its head and a noticeable hump on its back. I assume I noticed this because its face didn't make sense. Its teeth, just one big mouth with hundreds of misshapen teeth. The entire face looked like it had been scooped out and just given teeth, rows upon rows of teeth. I saw no eyes, no nose, no forehead, just long, creepy teeth. It snarled and yelled, "No men!" and I passed out. When I woke up, I was back in Felix's house, him already up and staring at the floor with a 1,000-yard stare. I asked him if I had some kind of weird dream, and without missing a beat, he says, "Mother Hilda is real, man. I thought it was a creepy fake thing, but I saw it too." We talked for about 30 minutes about what happened, and we had basically the same recollection of events, except Felix saw her move a step or two before he blacked out. I said I should go home. He said I should leave. We both went our separate ways. Over the next few days, I tried to message Carly, back in the days of MSN Messenger, but the only response I ever got was, "Mother Hilda never forgets." After 3 days of this, about 10 messages a day, I said, "Forget Carly. I didn't need that in my life." Never hung out with her again, although I did see her from time to time in school, but she refused to look at me. I had only one more encounter with Mother Hilda, whatever she is past that. I had quite a big yard before the river and had a sizable fire pit where I would have fires. Having Felix as my only real friend, I had many bonfires alone. That was fine. I enjoyed the spectacle of it all. So one night I was having a fire and I started to get really into it. Flames went maybe 15 feet high and I was having a great time. I had whipped off my shirt, placed it on the 6-foot poking stick I had and began chanting in gibberish. I don't know why, but it was a conscious action. Teenagers are weird. On the other side of the fire, through a line of trees, was a small path my neighbor had to go to the woods. I catch a glance out of the corner of my eye, something small in the trees. Thinking it could be a wildcat or maybe a baby bear, I stop to look at it. From the other side of the lines of the trees, I see Mother Hilda, her gaping maw wide open and facing in my direction. I go to scream, as is a logical action, but Mother Hilda yells no, and my raging inferno goes out. Not even an ember stayed lit, cold, dead fire. I look back, no Mother Hilda. I decide that is enough of that, and I book it into my house as fast as my legs can go. When I get inside, my mom asks me why I'm not having the fire anymore. She rarely cared what I did, so I asked why she wanted to know. My mom said that the nice girl who wears black asked about me maybe 5 minutes ago at the front door. Mom had told her I was having a fire and she started to walk to the backyard. I go to my room, horrified, and message Carly on MSN to demand what was going on. I shouldn't have gotten an answer, since she had just been at my door, but I did. Mother Hilda likes you. I haven't really told anyone this story before, as it is one of my many more outlandish ones, but my friend Felix still won't talk about it. I met him a while ago when I traveled back to Newfoundland and asked him if he remembered Carly and the creepy house. He just looked at me with dead eyes and said, "Mother Hilda is real, man. Don't mess around," and legitimately just walked away. I still have yet to make sense of it, like a lot of things that have happened to me. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.